Hello, gotta find my unmute button. There you go.
Yeah, nice. Hi, Rob. How are you? Been a little while since I spoke to you.
Yes, it's been a little bit. Stuff happened, a lot of work,
Yeah.
a lot of work. So yeah,
I've seen
it's
you.
been it's been a busy couple of. It feels like years, but it's probably just months.
Yeah, and big, massive congratulations to becoming a Cloud Native ambassador. That's awesome. I've seen quite a few people online, so it's good to have you on the team here as that as well, strengthening the brand. Thank you.
It's we had a kickoff meeting today, and I believe the number is 155 ambassadors.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
It's quite a lot for it's a rebooted program. So it used to be a program, and then they kind of stopped, and now they're rebooting it. So they're gonna have this spring fall type thing. So 2 times a year there's gonna be pickups of new ones, and they're it's going to be interesting to see how they deal with that compared to, for instance, like the MVP program and the other programs like Azure Cloud Ambassador.
And AWS Heroes and GK Community Heroes or something. I can't remember what the names.
The Docker Captains.
Oh yeah, there's that as well. There's a few issues with that as well, wasn't there? Docker recently changing a plan or something.
Yeah, and then they changed back. So that's what you get for not listening, I guess. But I'm not going to express that many opinions on that.
But at least they listened to the community in the end, and they reverted their change. So that's always good.
Yeah.
And I guess we should probably jump in with the code of conduct before we get too deep into this session tonight. So I'll just bring that up. So in today's session, we ask everyone to be aware of others, be friendly and patient, be welcoming and respectful, be open to all questions and viewpoints, be understanding of differences, and most importantly, be kind and considerate to others. So yeah, just be nice, basically. Be normal.
There's an expression where I come from, but I can't say it online.
Same. I was thinking about saying it.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Just be cool.
Yeah, just be cool. Let's go with that one.
Yeah.
So, Rob, we've got a super special guest today.
Yes,
it's you.
Yes. Hey. Yeah, it's one of those things where obviously, even though I'm part of this and you're part of this and Carl and April, we're all part of this, we try not to put ourselves in the driving seat for these type of things, because the reason to have these types of groups is to promote others more than anything else. But just happens to be that the March spot was open and we didn't have anything planned, and I just got asked, and I randomly put together some slides, and then I used it while I was in Bergen, which is a town in Norway for everyone in the world, and did it there and improved a little bit on it. But I did it in front of an live audience. I got plenty of questions. There's a lot of discussion points, and which is kind of what I was hoping with this session. So when I'm going through, I'm not going to go through that many slides, but I'm going to be discussing things. Come with questions, like anything you can think of during the moment. Just throw it out there. I'm watching all chats everywhere. So if there's anything that piques your interest on this topic, just yell it out, and I'll diverge into it, so it will become a good presentation.
Awesome. Sounds good. I know I'm probably going to have quite a few questions because I need to get a bit deeper into the world of GitOps. So I'm looking forward to this one. Yeah. And there's no one better than I know who knows GitOps than you. So it's a good fit.
I've talked a couple of times about I just usually talk about GitOps. So it's it worked out.
Yeah, it's perfect. Right. So I'm going to leave you to it, and I'll put your slides up on the screen now. So see you in a bit.
All right. See there. And I'm just double checking that I updated the date and everything. All right. So this one is called Pragmatic GitOps. It's an attempt to kind of just pull everything that I've learned over these 3 years or something that I've been doing GitOps as my primary way of delivery application to cloud native platforms. But anyway, again, this is a slide for people that different type of venue, but I'll still go through it. In case you don't know, my name is Robert, and I work as a principal cloud engineer at a company called Amesto 42. Yes, it's 42, as in the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Except we don't know what the question is. So that's kind of the point of the company. We're trying to build stuff that makes sense in different scenarios and try to, make sense of everything, I guess. Microsoft MVP for a couple of years. I've been a HashiCorp ambassador for a couple of years, and like mentioned, I become a CNCF ambassador just recently, like not that long ago. So it's an exciting thing. The reason why I am that is because I'm in the CNCF. I do things with the platforms working group, the Open GitOps project, which is what we're going to talk about. And I do, in general, a lot with Cloud Native and stuff like that. But if you want to know more, just go to my LinkedIn, or else I'm going to sit there and explain everything about my life, and I don't want to do that. All right. So the agenda is going to be something like this. I obviously, like I said, want questions as we go along. I think it makes sense for this topic. So we're going to talk a little bit about some sort of introduction to GitOps, just quickly, like a high-level introduction to principles of GitOps and why we are talking about GitOps. And then I'm going to dive a little bit into implementation considerations, like environment and repository structures and stuff like that. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because, what is GitOps? And I think it's before I became part of kind of like the GitOps gang, if you want to call it that, I probably also considered like the word to be a literal thing. It's getting it up. So if you have stuff in Git and you do some automation on it, then you have GitOps. And a lot of people think that, and a lot of people still think that. It turns out that it's more than that. It's a very specific thing. It's a way to do your, I call it an operational model. So it is a specific technical thing, and it's more than just taking something and storing it in Git and then running, your pipelines straight towards it. But and I've done this a couple of times. I kind of want to go back and talk a little bit about how we did stuff. And I call it the past ? Because we probably shouldn't, in a cloud native world, log into servers, right? We shouldn't SSH or use remote desktop. We still kind of do to troubleshoot in most cases, but in itself, the way that we did things before doesn't scale. Jumping in and out of servers, doing these manual tasks or imperative workflow, as I call it, doesn't really work in a big environment. It used to work when we had like 5 servers running the show, but we don't anymore. Now we have containers, we have stuff that needs to be able to spin up in a couple of seconds because we need to scale up and we need to scale down, and we can't have this entire service doing everything anymore. Although we do still tend to kind of do that. So since we want to automate everything, we obviously have this concept of CI/CD, or continuous integration, continuous delivery. But what I feel is that like continuous integration makes sense. It's the continuous integration of code into somewhere specific. So it's Git, right? You can work on different branches and then you can merge it together. You can have tests run automatically on that. You can make sure that everything's okay. And at the end of the day, you're going to build something, some sort of artifact, be it a container or an application or binary of some sort. And then you're going to put it out somewhere. And that's kind of the continuous delivery. You made sure that your software is continuously in a deliverable state. However, we've been using CI/CD tools to do continuous deployment as well, which I feel is a slightly different thing. A pipeline is it is an automatic, so CI, CD, sure, we can call it that. But a pipeline is more or less just manual steps put in a row, and then you run it over and over again. And when you're doing deployments, you might have scenarios where stuff fail. You might have scenarios where something doesn't go according to plan. You need to troubleshoot it. Like, what do you do then? In my mind, we need to get to where our continuous deployment part is literally, is this supposed to be deployed? If so, then just make it so. And that is the deployment part of this. So you develop your stuff, you test and build, or build, and then build or test, depending on how you set everything up. Then you make sure that it's deliverable and deliver it to some sort of repository somewhere. There's lots of variety in all of these boxes, but at the end of the day, you just want, I'm done building my stuff, have it deployed. And so that was kind of what GitOps does. And just to go a little bit back, as I say on top here, we have the technology. It's literally what Alexis Richardson from WeWorks kind of alluded to in 2017 when he wrote a blog post about GitOps and actually coining the term GitOps. So this is what we wanted to do all along. We just want our deployment to be automatic. And throughout this post, he kind of describes a lot of things that we later on kind of settle on. This is GitOps. But in like 2018 to 2019, there's more or less a Wild West out there. So people, like I said, took the term, started using it in all kinds of weird scenarios. And then in 2020, in the CNCF, there was a GitOps working group that got started. And it got started by people from WeWorks, Amazon, I'm going to forget someone, Google, Microsoft, CodeFresh, and Red Hat. And I don't think I forgot anyone. And so they started this on the basis, like I said, it's just a Wild West. Like, there's no standard here. So they made the GitOps working group, which then later became the Open GitOps project. And one of the things that happen in Open GitOps projects is that we have the GitOps principles, which kind of defines the process. And then later on, Argo CD and Flux as kind of like the two main GitOps toolings or tool ecosystems went through and became CNCF projects, and all up until the point where it's now a graduated project. So it went through the sandbox stage and the incubation stage, and are now a graduated project, so it's a full-fledged project. And we had GitOps Con, and we had all these events happening around on GitOps, and I see more and more now starting to kind of embrace GitOps as what we feel that it is. So as the question went on, if anyone heard of the GitOps principles, here they are in an easy to understand package. So this is version 1.0.0 because obviously we versioned our principles as well. But these are kind of the main points that we feel is the definition of GitOps. And when you look through this, you see some words that are not, you see the lack of some word. For instance, Git in itself, it doesn't say that it has to be stored in Git. What it does say is that it has to be the desired state, which is what we call, basically our desired state. What we want that to be stored somewhere that's versioned and mutable. So when you have your desired state and you create an update, you want that to be a new version. And the reason for that, obviously, or not, maybe not that obviously, is that if you're doing a change and the change breaks something, you can always revert to a state that worked. This, version storage is perfectly, is Git basically. But you could also put it into an S3 bucket or a blob storage and many other places where it actually is versioned and mutable. We obviously want our state to be declaratively expressed. So we don't want to put in, do this, create this thing, and then connect them together. We want to say we want our state to look like this, and then the tooling should take care of the rest. We want it to be pulled automatically, so we don't want something to be pushed out the change. So this is kind of where I feel it's very different than pipelines, because pipelines is usually, it's triggered by something, but then it pushes the changes out. In our case, we want the change agent to be where the change is supposed to happen. This means we can secure it better, et cetera, et cetera. And we want it to be continuously reconciled. So if something happens out in our desired state, that needs to be reflected in our system. And throughout there, it says software agents. It says desired state stored somewhere which is immutable version and retains a complete version history. It doesn't actually say Kubernetes. It doesn't say Git, and it doesn't say any specific tools. This is where it's kind of up for debate how to implement this, but it just happens so that this comes from a Kubernetes world. So it obviously the tools are very GitOps specific or Kubernetes specific, and that doesn't mean it has to be like that. But at the moment, that's the most mature model. And like Richard says, you can store it in Dropbox. Probably not. I think that's actually immutable, but that's actually mutable, not immutable, depending on how I look at it. So yes, how does Kubernetes enable GitOps? So Kubernetes enables GitOps by the fact that you can extend the Kubernetes API with new resources using custom resource definitions. And since Kubernetes is built up on this controller pattern and potentially operator, if that's the case, you extend your API and you have something that will reconcile everything for you. Let's see. So that is how Kubernetes enables GitOps. And the tools that are out there to do this is there are more tools than this. I just want to get that straight. First of all, there's a lot more tools than this, but Flux is kind of the originator of the term and of basically an entire domain. And Argo is a very early alternative way of doing this. So when you start looking at this, like what to choose, there's a couple of things that are different. And you might even be in a scenario where one tool works for part of your organization and then the other tool works for the other part of the organization. So the main difference when people start looking at it is that Flux doesn't have anything other than CLI tools and uses Kubernetes native stuff. Argo has a graphical interface. That's what people see at first, at least. I would, for my sake, I would argue that Argo is also, they implement things in a slightly different way, while Flux tries to be more using the same tools that you would use even if you were doing stuff through CLI. So while Argo has application sets, which is a way for them to define how to do these deployments, Flux more or less you just point it towards a folder where there's Kubernetes manifests. Again, which one of this is better? None of these are better. It all depends on your use case. When I do platform services, I tend to use Flux. That's just because it's kind of doing everything in the back end there. I don't expose this to anyone else but the platform team that needs to have access to things. And if there's anyone that from outside of that wants to change anything, they can go through Git. Argo is something that I see a lot of people do when they work directly against developers or people that might have a better time with a more visual overview. So while you would have to maybe know more directly about how Kubernetes works, in the back end for doing stuff with Flux, Argo might be easier for you to template and give the developers, this is how you set up your application. But again, there's no clear winner here. While we're on this subject, I want to do a little bit of a shout out. During KubeCon, the last day, actually probably one of the last sessions as well, I'm going to be in a panel discussion. And the panel discussion is about how GitOps changed our lives. And it's a Flux maintainer and a Flux end user, an Argo maintainer and an Argo end user. So we're going to be on stage, talk about, how all of these things, work together and how from all the different aspects. Bionetic asked if you can use the both at the same time. They don't overlap in that sense. So they can coexist on the same cluster. Obviously, if you start deploying the same things with both tools, it's going to be a little bit hairy. But in itself, what is a very relatively common scenario is, for instance, platform services. So stuff like cert manager, ingress controller things, those type of things that come from a platform team could potentially be pushed out through Flux, while Argo CD might then be deployed through Flux, and then be the entry point for developers or other people that are using this platform. So you can have both at the same time. I would argue that while that works, you're at some point you're kind of you have a lot of resources that gets lost in between here for something that basically does the same thing. But then you have deployment patterns like having some sort of cluster control cluster, whatever you want to call it, CCC, where things might be done through Flux, but then kind of bootstrap stuff up with Argo on the other side. So like I always say, there's no, it depends. There's no right answer. And speaking of things to choose between, I see a lot of people using Helm when they're doing these type of deployments or templated deployments. And then you have Customize, which is a template solution that is built into kubectl. What Customize does is that it's and I'm going to show it afterwards just so it's more clear. You have your a base deployment, which is just normal straight up and down Kubernetes manifest, and then you can have overlays and to change certain aspects and based on the context of where you're running your command, you will actually rebuild these and set them together to get an end result that makes sense. Helm is a good tool. I start off by that. If you create something, for instance, like cert manager, like I mentioned before, or an ingress controller, or a service mesh tooling, etc., Helm works really well if you are the end user, because at that point you're saying, I want to install this package. It's literally a package manager for Kubernetes. But writing these Helm templates or config files usually is something that a lot of people struggle with. And that's just because of the complexity of how you put it together. I see a lot of people that are trying to do GitOps or in general deploy stuff into Kubernetes clusters that look for a solution to how to do things in a, based on the dry principles, don't repeat yourself and everything like that. And then they start using Helm. And Helm, that's where you get all the complaints about YAML from, I think. Again, Helm is a great tool for the right job. For me, customizations make more sense. They are very easier. They are easier to look at and kind of understand what's going on in what context. That doesn't mean you can't use Helm. For instance, Flux can deploy Helm charts. So you can have a Helm release in your cluster that deploys something that someone else written in Helm. That doesn't mean that you have to do everything in Helm. And Richard loves Helm, which is perfectly fine. I love Helm too, for the right things. Let's look at code or something. Let's see. So I guess this is big enough. I'm trying to look at the stream when I get so far. By the way, my terminal is looking weird. I to be honest, I sit on my Mac all the time, so I had to just kind of get everything to work again on my PC to do this. And now, for some reason, if I do this, yeah, I got like, that's not my color scheme. Let's just say that. So here I have, and you can find this repository on my GitHub, and my GitHub is just my name, the full name, and it's called Demo GitOps. I will be changing stuff here back and forth, but if you are wondering what's happening, you can feel free to go in there now. Inside of here, I have, and this is going to be very Flux specific, by the way, just letting everyone know. I have a clusters folder, and I have a couple of folders for my environments. And the reason why I do this is, if you think of the GitOps, like GitOps as a principle, we want to simplify deployment. The common thing that people start thinking about is promotion between different environments. And since this is in Git, everyone starts thinking about having different branches. However, the common, or the, call it best practice, or the most common deployment pattern to do this from a Flux perspective is to have a folder that has subfolders with your environments in it, and is all residing in main. The way that I like to think of it is that if you have a repository that is for deploying, your platform resources, for instance, the only person or the only persons that are going to have access to this repository is probably going to be your platform team. So they should be able to do, commits straight into main, because they don't have to necessarily, get this through an approval process. It's their resources. And like if you want, you can have a pull request scenario to do some testing or things like that. But like I said, the idea is that if you put something into main and something that breaks, you can always roll back, right? So how I've set this up is I have these two environments in the cluster folder. If I look into dev, I have at the moment, a Flux system folder and a web app folder. Flux system comes from Flux, so that is generated by Flux. But if you look at the web app one, I have a customization.yaml file. If I look at this, it says it's a kind customization. I have some labels here. And then I refer to a base, and I put in a prefix and some stuff related to replicas and so on and so forth. So this is the only thing related to web app that exists in my dev environment. But if I look at apps and web app, you can see, first of all, I have a customization, and at the moment it's a very, very simple thing for me. It has one YAML file in it. It's called manifest, and if you look into that, it has everything in it. If this was a big deployment, I probably would have it in separate files, etc., etc. This is demo purpose, so whatever. But it deploys it namespace, it has a deployment. It has everything it needs, more or less. It has a service and so on and so forth. But if you look at in the perspective of the customization happening at the dev cluster, it takes all of that, adds a prefix, sets the replica count to 1. So if I look at what I think is my dev cluster, yes, we can see here that I have, if I look at this specific web app namespace, I have one deployment called dev web app. That is one to one. YAML versus YAML without an A. I like the look of the YML. And yes, it saves a little bit of space. I don't think I'm going to get into, that's kind of optimizing for something that doesn't matter. But I just like how it is. Also, if I don't see YAML, I kind of feel that I'm not working with YAML, so everything's good. So all the frustration is gone. This is a cluster that I have bootstrapped already. So if we, really quickly look at the Flux system, we can see we have our Flux controllers. And again, just to explain if people aren't aware of this, Flux set up these different controllers. We have a source controller. That's the controller that looks at the Git repository that I pointed this towards, and make sure that if something happens there, it will then pull down all of that code. We have our notification controller, which when stuff happens, you can have it send notifications to Teams or Slack or Discord or wherever you have a webhook that you want to send something to. Then it has a customized controller and a Helm controller. So when I'm doing customizations, it's the customized controller which does all the work. It's actually also the one that you don't have to define stuff as customizations. I'm just doing it now because I'm reusing code for several environments. If I wanted to, I could create a folder here and create a straightforward Kubernetes manifest, and that will work as long as there's no customization.yaml file in that directory. If there is, that's what it's going to try to deploy. So the customized controller, builds the customization or the manifest from the customization, or deploys normal Kubernetes manifests. And then we have the Helm controller, because Helm is a different CLI tool than kubectl. It's an entirely different way of doing stuff. And the two resources that the Helm controller looks at is a Helm repo or repository. So you can define, just like you would with Helm CLI tool, you define where are we searching for and finding these charts. And then there's a Helm release, which then does the Helm install, so to speak. For Flux install, I can't talk. For Flux install in AKS, to use the AKS extension or other methods. So I do a lot of things through Terraform usually. And a Terraform provider for Azure doesn't have the add-on yet. So up until that happens, the answer is I do it in many ways. I can deploy stuff and then manually bootstrap if I'm doing stuff like this. I could potentially do stuff through policies, or use other means to automate a Flux bootstrap. There's a Terraform provider for Flux, and it kind of pull down all the YAML and then kind of revert it to Terraform. So it kind of works in a weird way, but it does work if the scenario where if it's something that you can do where you're running all this. So the answer is I don't know, but I would say that the Flux or the GitOps add-on, as it's called, which then installs Flux and everything like that in AKS, works really well. So I would. It also takes care of upgrade and everything like that, which makes it a better experience for you. But obviously, until Terraform has everything in its place, I'm gonna be doing, a lot of weird different things. You could use the AZ API to upgrade the resource after you deployed it, which is a way to do it as well. So let's just so now I'm in K9s, and I'm going to change context to my production cluster where I have nothing installed. Call it production cluster, but it's just the same cluster over again. And I'm gonna bootstrap the production environment now. So we can look at the customization first. It's literally the same thing, just to make it easy. This could be very advanced. Like this can have a lot of different things in it, but it's easy. Easy example so we don't lose the thread of how everything hangs together. But we have name prefix is prod this time instead of dev, and this has a 3 count replicas. one thing to note, though, that I haven't done, which is bad. So for instance, here I have replicas set to 3 here. So if I didn't in my overlay say a number of replicas, I would have 3. One very, a typical thing that people say is if you have anything inside this deployment that, let's see, maybe I didn't see it. Sorry, getting word from Discord as well. Trying to close everything. So if you have something that your deployment should you should specify in the deployment, you don't always want to have that in there unless there is a safe default that you want to go for. In my case, I just took some YAML and put it in here. But come on. Sorry, I'm gonna close Discord really. Not that there's anything secret going on, it's just gets annoying. Okay, apparently I don't. Like I said, I'm not on my Windows computer ever. There's Discord. All right, so and that was Christina, and she's great. Go to Twitter and follow her. She also talks about these kind of things. Anyway. So the most common thing is like if you don't have a safe default, and for instance like replicas is something that you might want people to make a decision on when they're doing the deployment. So we might choose to not have replicas here. So to force people to kind of put it all together. Anyway, long story short, we have our customization, prod, web app 3 looks good, right? I have a Flux system here. And we can look at the Flux system and you can see it's kind of the same thing as customization refers to these two stuff. So we have our not relatively long folder. And since I'm going to do exactly the same thing again, I don't really care. But usually I would end up, if I'm doing demos, I would remove this folder. So I don't. The problem is if I have something changed that's not default by bootstrapping, this would actually override it. So I bootstrap. It will find this, and then it will, this is my desired state. This is what my state should look like. But in this case, I'm just doing the same thing that I did previously. And then we have our components, which is a, relatively long file. This is where you get into all the memes about YAML being fun. So, it says there, do not edit. I agree, not because you can, but just because, why would you? Anyway, let's go over here. One thing to note, in my environment variables, I have a GitHub token, so I can do all this. So when I write Flux Bootstrap GitHub, I refer to my, the organization where this is, which is me, my repository. I put in that it's my personal. I guess this is hard to read on stream, but it says personal equal true because it is. And since this is production and not, I'm just going to make sure that I actually am, kind prod. I'm referring to the cluster/prod folder. And if I do this, it should start spewing out Flux stuff. There you go. And as soon as that's ready, we can look at the type customization, which is how Flux do things. You can see it's ready false, source is not ready, artifact not found. And that's because the source controller is now looking at my Git repository and then downloading that as an artifact. And as soon as it finds that, there you go, it then applies. And as you can see here, applied revision main, because that's the branch that I'm in. And then a reference to the hash of the commit. So, like I said, now we have a a state, a desired state that matches the latest and greatest. If I, like I said, update now and then do a git revert, first I will update for the new state and then it will automatically pull it back. We can look at deployments. See that we have a web app, which now is called prod web app. and it has 3 of 3. So we're using the same code as before, the same deployment, but now we're doing changes based on which environment it is. And we bootstrap 2 different clusters into 2 different folders. And when I talk to people about promoting through the different stages and stuff like that, it usually is as easy as in your dev cluster in your overlay, you have, for instance, set up a specific version of the deployment, and you try that. You just bump up the version, and then the deployment happens automatically. And then you look at it and go like, all right, this is cool. And then you move on to do the same change in prod. However, you could use there's something called the image reflector in Flux, where you can point it towards an OCI type repo, OCI standard repo, container image repository, and then say that, look at this container, look at this tag. When there's a new tag that's deployed, update the container used in this deployment in Git. And that is something you probably want to be doing in, for instance, dev. And you could potentially do that in prod as well. If you're doing it in prod, I would strongly suggest having some sort of progressive delivery tool. So it's in Argo world, it's called Argo Rollouts. It's the tool that project has, and Flux has a Flagger. So what you can do then is you can set up a progressive delivery scenario where there's a new version of your application. All right, it creates a new deployment and a new service, and then Flagger takes hold, and you start pushing traffic against the new deployment. And based on some tests that you can set up, you can say that, or if it starts failing, scale down to 0, and you're in a state where the new deployment isn't working. So you have to figure out what's going on. So you don't necessarily change everything in prod and then have everything go, sideways. So for me, it's like I'm more leaning towards dev clusters and other environments being something that can just live its own life. I'm pretty sure that I would mostly like prod to be as not manual. That's the wrong thing to say, but whenever we've gone through all the automation and see that stuff works, I prefer to just update the version manually. But you can set up all kinds of scenarios that do a lot of testing, and in most cases, it's fine unless you're in the very specific environments. All right. So I talked for almost 45 minutes now, and we had some questions. Before I quit the entire thing, so to speak, and go to bed because it's later, is there any questions from the audience? Or maybe there's some questions from Richard, if I didn't talk to that.
I've always got questions when it comes to GitOps. So I like the way that you can have that customized file, but how I was looking at the sort of format of it. Obviously, YAML is all about spaces, but you're customized when you're doing replicas and the name overlay, it didn't line up. So how does it know to link the two together?
Yes, so that's a good question. It's actually something that is specific to customize and how it works. So these are well-known fields. You could define it where it kind of like overrides the entire layout that you're used to. But since replicas is something that is a very specific thing, this is a replicas for a deployment. So it actually is its own field. Okay. And as you can see here, it will match and then set the replicas on the deployment, replica controller, replica set, or stateful set. So this just knows that if you're pointing towards a base that has replicas of some sort, and you say here, we need replicas, and you can see I also say name web app, is because I'm referring to there you go, to this deployment. it literally just knows that this is what I mean. I mean the replicas of deployments in this case. There's other ways you can do this by you can overwrite through JSON. It looks kind of weird, but you can have some like a halfway Kubernetes manifest, like just like skim off all the things you don't need, but just the things you want to change, and then you have that there's a merge strategy that you can define where it takes that and just like merges together these two files, which also seems kind of weird, but at that point you would have more of what you're thinking, like that actual structure of finding the right thing to change. I don't remember all of the. There are some very specifics from customization that makes it easier. For instance, name prefix. You don't have to go and say, I want the deployment's name to be changed, because if I say name prefix, I literally mean I want to prefix everything.
Okay, that's quite cool. So it does some sort of like customize magic in the back end for us using that massive file.
And there's also like a name postfix, so it actually can put on the end stuff if you want that.
That's cool.
You can generate config maps. You can generate secrets. Like you can do a lot of things with customizations. And like I said, what I like about this over Helm, again, not that Helm is bad, but what I like about this is that at the end of the day, I'm just doing my normal YAML. If I go into my clusters dev and my web app, I can do a K because
got the alias set.
Yeah, I think so.
Hopefully,
I'm not sure because no, it's not.
No.
Customize. I keep on tab completing, which I don't have on my computer because I only use it for gaming. Oh, okay. It's not it's customized, which is one of. And there you go. So what it did is literally just pushes out a new set of YAML based on the base and the override.
That's cool.
So
that's cool.
When I work with this, which is why I kind of feel like, sure, you can just put it into main. It's probably going to work. If you change something here, it's not push out the change and then look, did it work? It's more of a, like I did my change, and then I go in and I run the customize on that file and get the build out, and I can look at it and go like, yeah, it is prefixed with dev. Cool, right? We have if I did something with a config map to auto-generate based on values, I could look at it and see, all right, everything worked as expected. Push that to main.
Okay, so it's sort of like the Helm dry run, where that will create you the whole thing. But then once you've got this, you can create this straight to the file and push it to main. And that.
Yeah, so cool. if I did this, I would have, I would have my file.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, but in this case, like the actual building of the YAML itself, that happens through the customization controller from Flux.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that they have their name prefix in that, because obviously with Helm you have to put that into your template already, whereas here it's quite nice to do that. Yeah, that's nice.
And everything like common labels, stuff like that. These are the logical things that you want if you're doing multiple environments. You might need a different label on the deployment. You might have a different team that does certain things. What you actually can do is you could, for instance, in each environment, you could have like an apps folder, and you could have cert manager, and then you can have your full-fledged cert manager deployment. But in your dev cluster folder here, you could have a manifest that just says, not even bases, but resources refer to this folder, and then it would just do that deployment. So then you could, update your app definition, and it will like point in all the different clusters, because at that point you're not doing, you're not doing prod cert manager and stuff like that. You just need your cert manager or ingress controller or whatever it is. So you can mix and match these type of systems. And like I said, you could also potentially do Helm releases and things like that if that makes sense to the team that's responsible for everything.
Yeah, I've done Helm with Flux before, but not the customize. I've sort of stayed away from customize because to me Helm just sort of makes sense in my head because it's like a bit of PowerShell. Like you got variables and stuff. So in Helm charts, it's just you're filling the variables, but from a file called values file. So to me, it's sort of the same principle in my head. Maybe not everyone's, but that's how I work.
That we are allowed to be different. That's kind of one of the things where some of these things I say not only because it's kind of like a personal preference, but it's from an actual experience point of view. Like for instance, having separate branches as a strategy when doing GitOps usually ends up going completely off the rails at some point. You forget which branch you're in because everything's the same in all branches at that point. And there's a slow process of getting this through. If you have folders that make sense, it's like from a cognitive perspective, or a human perspective, it just makes sense to more people, and I've seen less mistakes being done.
Okay.
By having to
so if, say, for production, would you have a separate repo or just still use the same repo instead of different branches?
So if you there's several ways of doing that, and actually on the Flux documentation, there's a lot of examples on how to do this. So you could either have one mono repo for every manifest and all the clusters and so on and so forth. The main issue there is that if you want this to be like, your platform team might be very good with Kubernetes, but your application developer might not be. Not because they're necessarily bad at it, because that's not what they work with. They work with code. There's a lot of things to take into consideration when updating a manifest, no matter how it's deployed. And you might say then, okay, we want branch protection, so but we as the platform team can go through and force push stuff and so on and so forth. But it makes so much more sense if, for instance, you have a platform repository and then a team or application repo. So if you're, and when I say that, I mean in the sense of that's where you keep your deployment files, either for a team or for an application. Don't mix application source code with a Kubernetes manifest. First of all, because source code, there's a lot more automation. There's things that trigger based on whatever. You have branch protection. You have all these things. Like I said, GitOps, we want it to be simple. So those two kind of don't match. And if you're doing something like release please, I did this recently. I don't know why I did this, but I put some Kubernetes manifest in the same place as a application developer, development scenario. And we have a release please that takes all the commits and creates a release. So now the releases have literally, changed stuff in Kubernetes as part of the change log, and it looks stupid. So it just makes sense to have your manifests away from application code. And if you have an application repository or a repository for specific developer teams, they could have rights to do whatever there without, and it's much easier to control access on repository level than, on a folder inside a repository.
Awesome. Yeah, that's cool. Right. So, yeah, like you say, it's nearly 10 o'clock your time, 9 o'clock my time. So we should probably end now so you can get some sleep. Yeah. You've had a busy day.
I always have busy days, but it's fine. As long as it's in good company. So,
yeah. Thanks, I think. So thanks very much for coming and talking. As always, it's been amazing. I've learned quite a bit, so that's good. Yeah, you answered all my questions. I'm sure I'll get some more over the evening, and I might just message you on Discord. And if anyone wants to know anything, there's
there's no limit. Just like send me stuff on LinkedIn or Twitter or even Discord if you're in one of the Discord servers I'm in. Just let me know, and I'll try to answer as quick as possible. It can take a while depending on how many people get to me, but
yeah,
try my best.
Cool. Right. So thanks everyone for tuning in and asking the questions, and we'll see you next month, and we'll get that announcement out soon. Hopefully Carl will not be on an aeroplane next time, and he'll be here, and hopefully April will be here as well after she settled in at her new job at GitHub. So yeah, we'll see you next week. Next month. Next week, that'll be a bit too much. Yeah, next month.
All right.
Cool. See you everyone.